Thank you so much for doing this. It's we know how busy you are, especially right now, and but I think we'll both enjoy the conversation.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you on Deadline Detroit, and looking forward to our discussion.
All right.
So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Listen, there's some things that go on that really, you know how I feel about certain things, that we really never get to the real problem or the story behind the story. And I'd like to do some exploring with that, okay?
Good.
You know, one of my pet peeves is education. Mm-hmm. The way it's done today, which happens to be exactly the way they did it 60, 70 years ago. When Detroit was the Detroit public schools were rated at least in the top 10 in the country. Mm-hmm. Maybe even as high as number 1 or number 2. It's only New York public schools competing against them. And it's really hard for someone that's been here through that whole time to see what's going on and to hear what people are talking about as solutions. And I think there's some things that need to be done, and it's not just money. We're spending more money than we ever spent, and the results seem to get worse. The more dollars we spend, the worse the results are. What do you think of that?
I think the focus ought to be on outcomes.
Right.
And I mean, yes, you've got to make sure that we have adequate money to make sure that kids get a good education. You got to train teachers. But the focus ought to be on outcomes, not simply a numerical figure. And to me, it's like any line of work. You got to make sure that you produce. And the issue here is that, you know, kids ought to need to be able to read. And if kids can't read, and when our proficiency rates in schools across Michigan, not just Detroit, only 35% of our third graders are proficient in reading, we have a problem. It means the current approach is an F.
Right. I agree with that. I had to move from Detroit, where I'd lived my whole life, when one of my boys showed up with an A in reading. And since I was working with him every night on his reader, I realized that mark was ridiculous because he couldn't read. Mm-hmm. And we moved to a different school district, and he was reading at grade level within a year of being in that new school district. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that started me thinking a long time ago about what we're doing education-wise. We pretend like it's happy days, that every kid's got 2 parents at home, and that they are going to be able to teach that way today, and it just doesn't work.
And I think part of the issue is that everything in America has changed. Telecommunications, transportation, healthcare, you name it, except our methods in a significant part in terms of education. So we had an agrarian society when we first had the one-room schoolhouse, and life has changed now, and we see more concentration in cities, less in smaller towns and rural areas, and so that frankly puts stress on everything. But education, I don't think, has kept up with the pace of change, technology, trying different things. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think it's like the law of unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. We signed, as a result, I think, of the Constitutional Convention sometime in the 50s, Governor George Romney signed a bill that allowed public service employees and school teachers to join unions. And I don't know how many people realize that was a Republican, by the way, that did that.
It would have been in the early 60s. We had our last constitutional convention.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, this one had to be, was it in the 60s? Yeah, it must have been.
With Romney.
Yeah, probably before he appeared on the Lou Gordon show. I don't know how many people remember that, but he actually said he was brainwashed.
Yeah.
Which was the truth. even back then, the media didn't like the truth.
He was unfairly attacked. George Romney was.
Yes.
He got a raw deal on that.
Yes, he did.
Because he's a good man, and so is his family.
Yeah. Well, anyways, and he turned out to be a good governor.
Mm-hmm. He sure did.
But
George Romney was tough, bold. He didn't mince words. You probably knew him well. Yeah, I went to go have visits with George Romney on Valley Road in this area in southeastern Michigan. He used to give me some advice on policy and politics. Always liked the guy.
Yeah. Anyways, as a result, we've got a thing called the MEA, which is probably too powerful when it comes to deciding how education is provided in the city, and inadvertently, they really eliminated the incentive, especially on outcomes, for teachers by leveling the playing field for everybody, albeit at a higher salary, but not that much higher. And we have had a lot of fallout from that. Somebody asked me once when I was a kid how many of my teachers were women. I thought for a second. I said almost all of them, 99% of them.
When you were growing up.
When I was growing up.
And when I was growing up, both my wife and I went to Carpenter Street Elementary School in Midland, Michigan. We attended public schools,
Right.
and so did our children as well. But every one of my teachers were women. I mean, great teachers. I had a solid education.
Tremendous teachers, because that was one of the few places women could work back then. You could be a secretary, a waitress.
We have greater opportunity now.
They have, yeah, and the really, really top-notch individuals went into teaching, because that was the best thing that women could do at that point in time, for the most part. And now they can be attorneys, and it's accepted, and they can be partners in the law firm.
President of General Motors.
President of General Motors.
Or Consumers Energy, too. I don't want
Right.
Patty Poppy's watching this someplace.
Right, right.
And who's a dear friend of mine.
And so unless you have a real calling to be a teacher, if you want to go make money, they go into other stuff, or even industrial teaching. They can make twice as much money as a school teacher. All right, so it's got to be very difficult. And then those people that had a calling to teach and are willing to go teach and are really good at it are paid exactly the same as teachers who aren't that good at it. All right, or don't have the calling, or it's just a job.
So are you advocating for merit pay for teachers?
I'm advocating for change. Country of Finland, it took them 20 or 25 years to change the system there, but they are now rated the top public school, have the top public schools in the world, in Finland. And they pay their teachers an extraordinary amount of money. And they're very, very highly thought of in the community, a great deal of respect. When I say a lot of money, they make better than $125,000, $150,000 a U.S.
That's significant.
Yeah, and they have the best, and they have a position of respect in the community as well. But those are the kind of things I think we need to really look at. Plus, using technology to a much greater extent, I think would allow us to build that kind of thing. So I guess what I'm saying, rambling on about, and I apologize.
These are important discussions.
I think what I'm saying is, unless you fix it, nothing's going to change, all right? Unless we do something disruptive.
And part of this issue is the social fabric as well. That you know, every day our children we'd read to our children every day before they when they came home. They'd do their homework. We'd read before they went to bed. but that you did the same thing when you were growing up. I know you're doing the same thing for your children, but there are families now, not just in Michigan, but across this country, where the social fabric is torn, so to speak, and the care, love, attention, discipline is lacking. So those kids are ones we really have to attempt to reach, so that they have an opportunity to, you know, be part of this great country called America.
Yeah, but when we talk about education, all that's ever talked about by the politicians is that we need to spend more money, or we need more resources in the school.
Well, it's not just money. What change would you think we should have?
Well, I can go through a detailed explanation, but I think I would preface it by saying, how many learning disabled kids have you seen on video games? They all seem to be able to play the video games. And some kids that you might consider slow are pretty quick on video games. So why don't we use that kind of technology in the schools? Why don't we give the teacher a server, give every kid a magic disc or whatever the media is these days. The companies have, from the time they start school until they graduate from high school, and have the lesson plans in that on that video, and allow them to sit at their terminals, and allow the teacher with a central server to be able to monitor how every kid's doing, so she can go over to Johnny and say, Johnny, you know, you don't know how to multiply by eights.
Maybe you should start a charter school with special technology. Have you thought of that?
Yeah, but this is in the long haul. No, I haven't. I'm not an educator.
Except maybe that's part of the. Maybe we need different. Maybe that would be disruptive. You would be disruptive as a change agent.
But I'd have to keep those kids for that 12-year period of time, you know.
Or you hire folks with this, you know, Karmanos technology, and you try that.
Yeah. I think some people are trying that, but I also believe that the bureaucracy wants to keep the status quo. And that's what some of the things that you have to fight through, I think, if you become governor, on how do you get through that without being called a union buster or something like that.
Well, the less rhetoric and less shouting we have, and the more change we provide, to me, that's a better way to go. But because the status quo isn't working, and too many kids are trapped in schools that aren't working, and parents need more choices, and sometimes the cost of transportation inhibits someone who wants to go to a different school from getting there. And somehow we're going to have transportation scholarships, I think, and summer reading camps and summer reading coaches. If kids can't read, then the prism through which you look at Michigan and America is pretty gloomy.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was so concerned when my son got an A in reading and he couldn't read.
I remember you telling me that story one time, and that caused you to leave Detroit, right?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody knows, but if you don't read by the third grade, you haven't learned to read by the third grade, now the way you learn is by reading. So you're lost at that point in time.
Because geography, you've missed geography, calculus, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
you're done.
You're done.
It's over.
Right. Anyways, speaking of education, in the state we have Michigan State, Wayne State, whose board of governors are elected on a statewide basis. And then we have several other universities, lots of universities in the state.
12 others.
All right. And the state has
12 state-funded universities.
Yeah, state-funded universities. So, and you have to figure out, or the legislature figures out, somebody figures out how much each of those universities get. What I don't understand is why the University of Michigan, and you know, I had a son that went to Michigan, I had a son that went to Michigan State, and I have a son that went to Harvard.
So you're relatively neutral.
I'm very neutral.
Okay.
I read about Michigan's endowment, which is maybe the largest endowment of any public or state-funded university in the country.
It's big. It's big. That's for sure.
Why would they? Why do they need to receive more money than Michigan State, and certainly more than Wayne State?
Well, you know, it's part of their you have these traditionally you have these three bigger universities, Wayne State and MSU and U of M, obviously, and they get a bigger chunk, so to speak. I think most colleges in this day and age know that they better build up their endowment and better do a good job at fundraising, because resources from the state are so competitive. I think most universities realize they better step it up in terms of their fundraising. Now, why do those three get more than the other 12? And if you're Lake State up in the Upper Peninsula, you don't get obviously as much as others. They do it partly based on research, how much research each institution does. They do it partly on number of students they have, but it's always it's a political fight every time.
Yeah, well, like Grand Valley State, I think, is getting a lot more money than they used to. Maybe they're better at politics.
Oh, well, they may be better at politics, but that school has really grown significantly. Yeah. They've had some really outstanding leadership there. You know, Mark Murray, a friend of ours, did a great job, and outstanding leadership right now. But there's a lot of politics, there's no doubt about it, and that's part of my skill set. I understand politics.
All right. All right. Good. Well, let me put a pitch in for my alma mater. All right? I'd like to see Wayne State get more.
Okay. Right. At least you're straightforward about it. That's, okay. Fair enough. Done. Done. Well, don't you have your wife was on the board of governors?
Yes, she was
for a period of time. Yeah. So
yeah, I'm conflicted.
Well, and she's a warrior, to be sure. Yeah, as you are.
Listen, I've listened to a lot of stuff about Trump, and you're a Trump supporter.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the president's support and the vice president's support.
Yeah. And do you think that helps you today, or let me go a little further than that.
Quick answer: yes, I do think it helps, but keep going.
Well, I just wondered if either party has figured out why Trump won. All right, because as I listen to them and listen to what's going on, they seem to ignore why they won, and it's because I think you have the bubble in Washington, especially, but maybe even in Lansing and a few other places throughout the country. I don't think the vote was that much for Trump as against the other candidate at that time, Hillary. Mm-hmm. And I think Trump proved that the status quo in the Republican Party wasn't going to be accepted, because he beat out 14 status quo guys.
Yeah, he did.
And Bernie Sanders beat Hillary here
in Michigan. That's
Michigan.
Right. Yeah. The Democrat base in Michigan is basically, you know, Bernie Sanders and the way far left, who came in for my opponent Gretchen Whitmer, interestingly enough.
Yeah. So you think they'll ever figure out that people don't want this side of the spectrum and this side of the spectrum, and that they're fed up with the constant fighting among them? I think one of the keys to getting elected is to talk about what you're going to do, not how scurrilous your opposition is.
Well, you got to be able to talk in a straightforward way, authentic way about who you are and what you want to do and where you're from, and then you got to sometimes be able to block when the attacks come, and you got to do a little bit of tackling as a, you know, kind of like you do on a hockey rink too. But I think the Democrats haven't figured out what happened, and some of them just refuse to acknowledge. I think it was a combination of two things. One, Trump was direct and aggressive and said what he wanted to do, and frankly, people were fed up with Clinton and Obama in those years. I think part of it was because
and Bush.
Yes, exactly, and it was the coast, the folks on the East Coast and West Coast, and this whole kind of globalism. It helped on the elites, but I think part of this was the forgotten manufacturing worker, because you can drive in Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania, and you'll see where the tool and die shops have closed, and then the hardware store gets shuttered, and then fewer people in a school system, and that really can really impact and shrink a community. And then the global economy, people didn't respect manufacturing workers. So Trump spoke to those voices, I think, and people wanted to change from Obama and Clinton and Bush, as you say. And part of it was people got tired of all the political correctness, and let people express themselves. Now, he's obviously it's not a conventional presidency.
You think?
He's very unconventional, but he also he speaks his mind, and the fact that he delivered on judgeships, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, and that he cut taxes. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that the Ram truck, the production will be moved from Mexico to Michigan. When was the last time that happened? So I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
But we ought to have in this country less yelling, and yes, less attacks, and it'd be nice to have discussion. It'd be nice to have some conversation. And I was raised by a single mom after my dad died when I was a boy, and she and my two older sisters, we talked a lot about politics and this and that, and I'm sure you have that at your dinner table, but it ought to be based on how persuasive you are, and it's not on how loud can you yell.
Yeah, well, I think I saw a clip of Hillary saying they can't be civil until they win again. So.
And see, that's not how it is. It should be. The Democrats don't get it, quite frankly. I think they're still having a hard time grasping the fact that Hillary lost in 2016, and we'll see what happens in these midterms. I mean,
well, I've been getting emails from both sides, from all kinds of races, and the one thing that stands out in all the emails is, and they're absurd. They start off with an absurd thing. Trump's going to fire Mueller, or I'm trying to think of a Republican one that.
This is to get your attention. They're hoping that you read through the ad, right?
Yeah.
I think.
And as you read through these, you think, oh my God, do these people think we're that stupid? All right, and both sides, by the way, still.
Now, Republicans aren't free from this. It happens, Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, hopefully they'll unlearn how to use social media.
Well, the social media and those who, and the 24-hour news cycle is certainly, it's changed the velocity of political discussion now, because there's a 24-hour news cycle, and when something happens, there's comments all the time, and so it has altered the communication links with people all the time. I mean, it's changed it.
It certainly has, and I don't think it's for the better.
I agree with that.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to refer to my notes here. The Affordable Care Act. Now, it occurs to me that health insurance is going to cost a lot of money no matter what you do. So the goal shouldn't be how you redistribute the money. The goal should be, I think, that maybe we need to reduce the cost of health care and then figure out how people should pay for their insurance, okay?
So tell me what you mean by that.
All right, well, let's say you have a $100 health care bill. I think about $30 of that bill has at least 30, as much as $45, but let's take the first 30, is all around protecting themselves from being sued.
Mm.
All right, that's an enormous,
malpractice, tort issues,
and actual lawsuits and all that. So there's 30% of the bill had nothing to do with your health, and then you spend another 15% or 15%, because that's what the insurance company generally will charge you to process the claim.
the administrative overhead costs.
So it's 45%. 45% of every dollar, 45 cents of every dollar has nothing to do at all with health care, with taking care of you.
Right.
Right? So if we could fix that part of it, make it, especially with today's technology, you ought to be able to not have to spend 15% or 15% of the cost in billing for it, and another 30% covering the insurance costs of the doctors and all the other stuff around it. If you simply improve that significantly, you'd save a lot of money. All right, and then the health insurance costs would go down.
Well, the lesson I would take from that is that the more we get private sector involvement in health care, you'll get some innovation, you'll get some change, you'll get some disruption, as you talked about in education. But if it's government run, I think it's going to be disastrous. The bureaucrats will be in charge then, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, but I also think that if you remember when Obama talked about Obamacare to the AMA, the first thing he said was, we're not going to do anything about tort reform.
Right.
All right. First thing. And I went, well, then you're not going to be able to do much.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
All right. But, both parties have to understand that we have great medical care in this country. All right. And I think it's the best in the world.
I do too.
All right. But that they're hamstrung on costs because everybody has attached a little bit of revenue for themselves in this thing.
So you're advocating tort reform as part of this puzzle called healthcare.
Yeah, especially if you could save a big chunk of that 30%. What do you think of that?
I think you're right on that. I mean, period. And that's always been it's still a huge challenge in America. We see it in the medical field. You can see it in every other field where the lawyers, everybody lawyers up, and that just drives up the cost. And so I think tort reform would be a really important thing for America, not just Michigan, but for America.
Yeah. I think there's more lawyers in Oakland County than there are in all of Japan. Not that that's helped Japan much these days.
That's true. That's true. And as a lawyer, I get it. And the fact is that the tort reform is important for this country in terms of growth, ingenuity, and innovation. And I'm with you on that.
You're not going to lose too many votes because maybe all those attorneys are Democrats to begin with.
Well, I'm hoping that some of them are Republicans and Democrats, and my position on this is pretty well known. So I'm not breaking necessarily new news today, but I get it. I'm with you on that.
Let's talk about illegal immigrants. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let me.
Really an important topic.
Yeah. Let me set the scenario because I was reminded the other day that you're not running for federal office. You didn't remind me, but another person said that they're not running for federal office, so and that's a federal problem. But I'm a great believer in turning problems into good things. If you could solve the problem.
You like solutions.
I like a solution.
Yeah.
So now we're sitting here in the city of Detroit that has about 100 square miles of devastation remaining in the city with no hope of ever fixing that, all right? Just to set...
You meaning areas where there's blight, no people, no buildings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
There are 138 square miles in Detroit.
Yeah, and you could fit Manhattan, Boston proper, and San Francisco, plop them down in the middle of Detroit, and you still have 100 square miles left. All right? Detroit's a very unusual place. It evolved unusually. And what used to be its strength was the fact that it had a higher percentage of homeowners in the population versus anywhere else in the country. And
people had a stake.
Yeah, and now that happens to be a weakness, okay, because of the massive amount of real estate that's been emptied out. Saying all that, you know, it makes sense to me that if a state went to the government with a program, all right? I mean, one of the big problems in Michigan is population. You want to gain population.
That is, I think, Michigan's biggest issue is how we grow our state. Right. If we don't grow our state, we'll be less significant. We'll have greater strain on social services because we won't have enough jobs, people working, economic growth. The revenues a state or locality will have will diminish, and it'll put even greater strain on schools and healthcare, everything issue we're talking about.
All right. Well, amazing. I have a solution to a lot of that. All right.
Well, I'm going to hear, and so will our listeners. Our listeners, and so
if we could get
our group here,
500,000 to 1 million people to move back into the city that had jobs. All right, that would be really good for the state.
You bet.
All right, and then there's 3 or 4 other places in the state that this would help too. I think Benton Harbor is one place that's suffering because of depopulation.
Right, and I think Pontiac would be an area.
Right.
Muskegon Heights, Saginaw, Flint.
So if we had a program for immigrants, or illegal immigrants, say if you want a path to citizenship, we're going to make it easy for you in a sense. We'd like you to homestead. We'll help you with that. We'd like you to get training, successfully get trained for one of the million some odd jobs that we currently don't have anybody to fill in the state of Michigan. Electricians, welders, et al.
Talking skilled trades and apprenticeships. Then.
Right, all right. Pay for them their with a bill, but help them homestead, help them get trained, and upon successful maintaining the house, successfully getting a skill and a job, then you say, and you do that, and you do it for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, then you have the right to apply for citizenship. And we also have the right for you to pay us back on a small monthly payment for the amount of money we spent on you. What do you think of something like that?
Well, what you're doing is you're modernizing the Homestead Act of 1862,
right,
passed by Abraham Lincoln, where you'd get 40 acres and a mule, basically,
right.
Something like that. And what you're trying to do is a modern twist on that. I think elements of it are really, really positive. It's incentive. You got to play by the rules. I mean, what we need to do in America, you've got to have a welcoming immigration policy. But you got to play by the rules, and the other issues of protecting the border and security
I'm going to assume
that's an important element that has to occur. But your point is, if you have immigrants who come to this country, play by the rules, follow a system to earn your citizenship, and part of that would be home ownership, right?
Right. Yes. And in specific areas have been designated like that absolutely need that kind of population.
Now, do you
but
pay,
I'm also
do you
talking
pay taxes, or do you?
Oh, you pay taxes because they'll start working.
Right.
And you
What
know,
about on your on the homestead property?
sure.
You pay taxes on that, or you get
once
that?
once you get through the incubation period,
Mm-hmm.
where you actually can do that, then I think people would be willing taxpayers for property taxes and income taxes and stuff
So you
like
want
that.
to? This is your idea to how to repopulate American cities,
Right, and
Detroit in particular.
yeah, and you have anywhere from 12 to 20 million illegal people here, and I'm not, you know, there isn't a viable solution. You're not going to deport 20 million people at this point in time. You just can't. You don't even know who they are or where they are.
I think an important element on your suggestion is those who come to this country, there has to be a legal entry. There has to be rules that you follow. I think that's an important part of that.
But I'm talking about now. We have a massive problem with 12 to 20 million people who are here illegally. I don't condone that.
Right.
I'm just saying it is a fact. So how are we going to fix that? We need to fix the border and make sure that from the day we start this, that border is sealed and anybody walks.
Your point
in
is the border's got to be secure.
Yeah,
and
it's
I
got to
agree
be
with you on
secure.
That.
But
That's got
you
to be
know,
kind of the sine qua non of this.
yeah,
whole thing.
but the fox is in the hen house. We got to do something about that too. So one of the things that would drive people here is if you gave away for those illegals to stop being illegal, you know, and after a certain date, you'd say, now we're going to get you out of here too. But until then, I mean, how many busloads of people how many buses would you need to get 20 million people out of the country?
It'd be a lot of buses, obviously.
Yeah.
But I guess what your point is
It ain't going to happen.
You're suggesting how you could repopulate a city like Detroit or others with incentives for immigrants coming to this country.
Right. Or immigrants who are already here illegally. The way to fix the 12 to 20 is you're gonna follow these rules. Since you're already here, we'll give you a chance.
Well, man, you asked me about what was my take on it. I think the modernization of the Homestead Act of 1862 is a very interesting proposal. And the question is, how do you make sure you do that and still have a process step by step so that there are rules that everyone has to follow so that there's not two different systems for legal immigration and illegal immigration. That has to be, that's really the problem that it's gripping America right now, is that some will play by the rules and some who are flaunting the law, and that flaunting the law is wrong.
Yeah, you know, I also, but just as for background, I asked like over the years I've asked 6 sitting senators, who makes the rules on immigration? And I had 6 senators look at me, blink, and go, you know, I really don't know. All right? I mean, you try to get workers from Canada to come work here? Oh, man, it's no, no, no. All right?
Well, the people who should make the rules, this should be federal policy, and then our ICE and our Immigration Service and the Department of Homeland Security, that needs to be part of the solution on how you have the step-by-step process. Now, mind you, Washington hasn't come to grips on how to have a solid, legal, protect the border, hopeful immigration policy. That's been stalled out right now.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we still have people coming in the country left and right.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, you see the caravans approaching our country right now.
I'm not even, I mean, and I agree, stringent rules. What has surprised me since Trump's been elected is I didn't realize how insidious globalization has been and open borders, all right?
Right.
I don't think many Americans understand exactly what the choices are there. And by the way, that happens to be on both sides of the political spectrum as well. All right? Some very staunch conservatives really don't like nationalism any more than some very liberal people do. All right, it's globalization is an epidemic, I think, and it's one of the things that Trump has pricked with a pen. And
well, you can travel any place in this in the world, and other countries are having similar, maybe not identical, but other countries are having the same issue on immigration and borders and security, and economic security, as well as internal safety and security. This is happening all across the country. Look what's happening with Merkel in Germany.
Right.
She's will no longer be chancellor in the future because of her open border policy,
Right.
which the citizenry of Germany is up in arms about.
Yeah, again, I think that's just a bubble that these politicians have lived in. But what scares me is how under the radar it all was up until this last election. Maybe I was just, I'm a news junkie. I read everything I can read.
Right.
And I didn't read anything about how pervasive this globalization was as far as the United States of America was concerned. And it's sort of scary. And then now it's become apparent there are people who really are saying publicly now that we shouldn't have borders, that it's immoral. I don't know.
Well, that's nuts. I mean, you have to have borders, you have to have security, you have to have nationhood, and you know, I'm proud of our country, America, and I know that the people in Britain or people in, you know, pick a country, are proud of theirs too. But we need to make sure our country is secure, and that we just can't have open borders.
This has it has nothing to do with state, and it has everything to do with the state of Michigan.
Yes, it does.
All right,
yes,
so I just want to make sure everybody understands this is a very important issue, especially if you're trying to govern the state of Michigan.
I think your point is, I never want to speak for you, is that yes, immigration policy is determined by the federal government and our United States senators and members of Congress, but it impacts every state. So if you're in Arizona or Texas, you have a border that you want to you're conscious of. Well, in Michigan, we have international borders,
right.
So we need to be conscious of that, and so does sort of the Minnesotas and the Montanas and the North Dakotas, what have you. I mean, these are important issues, and you're right on that. But the federal government has failed to have a unified, consistent approach. Your homestead idea is really interesting. There'd have to be steps for, playing by the rules and having a legal process so that there's not a dual system.
That's right, and I would like us to be able to get immigration from Greece. All right, or something. I mean,
but they're having their hands are right now. Greece is having its hands are full.
Right.
The challenges that they have right now from other countries.
Well, especially they have a real refugee issue.
Yes.
With Syrians, but it's just it would.
And the other issue here is the religious persecution. Some people are fleeing their homeland because of they're being persecuted because of their religious beliefs. So they're fleeing their homeland, trying to come to a place that is where they're able to pray as they wish.
Well, Chaldeans who are Catholic Iraqis, I believe, or Catholic, I think Iraqis. We have the highest number of them, of Chaldeans, anywhere in the country.
It's part of the incredible rich diversity of the state.
Right.
A lot of individuals like that are seeking shelter, so to speak, so that they can worship their God and not be persecuted.
Yeah, and they're very productive.
Absolutely.
Pay a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, work hard.
Wonderful family ethic.
You bet they do.
But I don't know if under the way immigration has evolved in this country, whether or not, if it wasn't religious persecution, whether or not we could get any any Chaldeans here in the United States. You can't get Canadians easily. You can't get Greeks and Italians and most Western Europeans here. All right, so there's some real reform that needs to be done.
It's a huge challenge.
And if you remember when Trump said something about merit immigration, there was a hue and cry about that. Anyways, Bill, thank you so much for doing this.
I've enjoyed this. This has been fun.
All right.
I appreciate the discussion,
It's
Pete.
my pleasure.
Thank you for giving
All
me
right.
this opportunity.